Hi everybody, this is Jarek Murphy. Welcome to week 1 of How to Write a Novel. This is my course on novel writing basics. And today we're just going to talk about what makes up a story. How do you tell a story? What kind of elements go into it? We're kind of just doing a collage of some of the basic principles of writing a novel or writing fiction. We're not going to get into the plotting or story development yet. These are just what I think are the most important things that some authors get wrong, and they're important to keep in mind, especially while we start. I don't know if the sound is any good, so you can comment. I'm on my desktop because I decided rather than just talking like I usually do, it would probably be better to put together some slides for you. So I spent the last 3 days looking for art and illustration that can kind of communicate the point. That way you have something to look at while I'm going through basically checklists of the different elements. There's going to be one little exercise at the end. I'll try to do that every week so you have something to do. But otherwise, this week is really just to start getting the gears turning and thinking about what type of story you'd like to write. You may also notice that the list of topics that I'm showing on the screen may be a little bit different from what you find inside the course. That's because I've had time to go back and expand and put some extra things in, but I will add the PDF or the slides inside the course somewhere so that you can go through them a little more slowly if you need more time to process or look them over. So let's start. The first part is just what is story. I've come up with 5 basic elements that I think every good story needs. The first one is a unifying narrative, which is what a story really is. Things that happen, but by unifying narrative, I'm going to say also things that are tied together. So it's not just a whole bunch of random events that happen to a person. All these events are linked somehow. They're tied into one quest or adventure that has a beginning and an end. There's something linking it all, and I'll go into that more a little bit later. But rather than just a whole bunch of little vignettes or episodes or short stories, you readers need to feel like they're being pulled along, that your story has momentum. The second one is purpose, a goal worth pursuing and necessary by someone that we care about. We're going to get into in the next slide what I mean by characters that you care about, because it is really important. But basically, all of the action in your story has to matter enough to the characters that they are forced to take risks in order to achieve their goals. If it's not pressing enough, then they will just stay home and watch Netflix and not do anything. So you have to have reasons that things happen, and there has to be enough pressure that it forces the characters to take action. So purpose is a goal worth pursuing and necessary by someone we care about. Then the third one is drama. It has to have drama, which is conflict, suspense, and intrigue, which means the outcome is unclear. Readers will keep reading to find out what happens next. There also have to be stakes. There have to be risks and dangers that threaten the identity or the safety or the livelihood or something of your main characters so that they react. There have to be risks, but the outcome is unclear, which leaves doubt and dread and fear in the reader's mind and in the character's mind. If they're too confident, if they're not afraid of what's going to happen, then your story is not really going to be engaging. There needs to be conflict, suspense, and intrigue. And I'll go into more detail on all of these things in later weeks. This is kind of just a rough overview of some important things to keep in mind. The fourth is structure. A comfortable reading experience with clear signposts. What's happening and why it matters. Readers don't like to be confused. So if you have a story and people don't know how this is relevant, or they don't know where the story is going, there are certain turning points that every good drama will have, every good story will have. And we'll go through those next week. The basic story points that make up a novel, and then I have a really detailed chapter outline that might be useful also. I like to have structure in my book. It's very possible to just write your story without having a lot of structure, but on the one hand, I think it's harder to finish. On the other hand, you might get stuck, and if you don't really know where you're going and you don't have clear signposts that you know where you're going, if you're not telling readers, we're 25% in, this is the inciting incident, this is the midpoint, there are signposts that tell readers the story is progressing. And if you forget to include those, readers may not trust that you know what you're doing. You may not have the engagement or the commitment that you need from readers. And if they don't trust that you're taking them to a conclusion, they may quit reading. Or if they're confused and they don't know why this is even relevant or why it matters, then they may not trust that you're going to take them. They may not trust that it's worth the time to read your book. And we are hopefully writing a story that people want to read. This isn't just about how to write a novel, because of course you could just put down 50,000 words and write a book, and that's a huge accomplishment. It's fun to write a story, but hopefully with some structure, you can write a good book that people enjoy reading. So not only are you telling a story that really interests you and you had fun writing the story, but also it's fun for other people to read. That's really the goal of this course and everything that I teach. Finally, resolution, which means a concluding event with positive emotion, or the goal is achieved. It doesn't always have to be positive emotion, but generally you want a happily ever after, or you want some kind of happy conclusion or resolution for your main characters. The other thing that your story really needs is characters worth rooting for. You need a character, a protagonist especially. Your hero has to be likable. The readers have to care about your protagonist enough that they worry what's going to happen to them, and they have to like them enough to hope that they succeed. There are some things you can do to make your characters more likable. I made a short list. They can save pets, children, or elderly. There's a pretty famous book that's called Saving the Cat, about writing and screenplay especially. But the idea is, if you can get your main character to save a cat out of a tree in the first chapter, readers are automatically going to like that character more. There's a lot of little tricks you can use like that. Most readers like to root for the underdog, which means in the beginning of the story, your character can't be super powerful, super confident, and have everything in life, unless you're going to take everything away to teach them a lesson. They should be burdened by problems and responsibilities. They might have a unique hobby or style or totem. In some of my books, I add a totem, which just means a little object that's very meaningful for them and possibly has a backstory. You don't need to dive into the whole backstory right away, and we'll talk about that later, but you can make them a little more interesting by giving them a physical reminder of something that's important to them, something that they care about. It could be a past relationship or a past trauma or happy memory, or just something that they kind of hang on to. Sometimes your character will actually have what's called a fatal flaw, or a fear or a lack. I've also heard this called a shard of glass. And what this means by a fatal flaw is that there's one critical shortcoming that makes it impossible for them to complete their quest. And the goal of the quest is to overcome that one flaw or fear or lack that they had in the beginning. Somehow they heal themselves in the journey enough to become the person that they need to be to fulfill their goal. So the shard of glass is the same concept. They have like a deep wound because they have a shard of glass in their heart or something, and in the final scenes they take the shard of glass out. They take out that fatal flaw to heal themselves or realize this limitation that they had, and so that they can finally triumph over the antagonist or complete the story arc, and have their happily ever after. You can also think about having your character oppressed or repressed. Repression is coming from the inside, and oppression is coming from the outside, you probably want a little bit of both. So they want things, but they can't get them either because they are being stopped by external influences or they're stopping themselves due to internal influences. So usually somewhere in the beginning of your book, your character will start off already having wants and desires and needs, but they may have an inability to get them or a fear that they can't get them or don't deserve them. Often you'll see in fantasy art, you'll see like the princess on a hilltop looking out over the castle. They'll start off like in the city as an orphan, but in the distance there will be the rich people town or the castle or the prince or whatever. It's the impossible dream that they might pine for a little, but they never actually think that they will succeed and get there. A lot of stories actually start when one path closes. So you might start the action with something like they're applying to colleges or they're going for a big job interview. They think they're about to realize this goal that they've been working on forever, but then for whatever reason that completely falls apart. You tear everything down and they're forced to give up that dream and be shoved onto a new path. Characters have to want or need something enough to take action. So it has to be a really strong desire. And we'll talk about challenges in a little bit, so I won't go into that yet. There has to be a strong desire that motivates them to take action. They have to have wants and dreams and desires, because if they don't care about the end result, then they won't do anything. It can be about self-preservation or safety in the beginning when they're just reacting to external circumstances or plot events, but at some point they need to want something enough that they really care about the end solution. This could be a relationship. One of the earliest stories that we see in art and literature is the dragon and the princess quest. So there's a knight who has to go and save the princess, but there's a dragon in the way. So they have to go and defeat the dragon and save the princess, and then probably they get a reward. They get a kiss or treasure from the king, or her hand in marriage or something. So it's desire, it's challenge, and then it's reward. So there's something they want, there's something stopping them from getting it, and then there's the happy resolution. That's a really simple story, but they have to start off from a place of lack, because if they were already rich or happily married or whatever, then they wouldn't be interested in the princess or the treasure, or they have to not have enough that they want more. They want something better, they want a different life, and they want it badly enough that they're going to go out and risk challenging the dragon or endangering themselves to get the things that they want. However, they must be incapable of fulfilling their desires. They have to have an inability to get what they want. This is something I don't think is commented on enough when people talk about stories. They talk deeply about the character or the plot, but the basic arc of a story, of a character, of a protagonist, is usually that the protagonist changes in the story. So the story has to be too difficult for them currently, but in the process of completing the story goals, they have to become the person that is strong enough to overcome the challenges that the story brings them in contact with. So it's also true that not every story has a character arc, which means the focus of the story is the change in the main character. And that's the easy way to distinguish which character is actually the protagonist of your book. It's usually the one that has the most change. And that's not necessarily true for every type of book or fiction. We'll talk more later about different kinds of genre, contemporary romance, or maybe something like action thriller where it's really plot-based and the character doesn't necessarily change that much, but it's a good rule of thumb, at least starting out, to think about an event that's so big that your protagonist can't handle it. That's also just a good indication of whether or not this story is worth telling. If it's a story where the protagonist doesn't really have to work very hard to overcome all the obstacles, there's not going to be enough intrigue or suspense. Readers aren't going to wonder what happens next because there's not any significant risk, because the character is capable of handling all of the obstacles. Also, the obstacle or the main antagonist that they need to overcome doesn't necessarily have to match the fatal flaw, but it's really nice if it does match up somehow, if you can figure out a way. This takes a lot of planning, and I wouldn't necessarily waste too much time trying to wrestle with this, because ultimately the events of the story are going to matter more than this deep character stuff. But it's nice to have, and it's nice to think about if you can make it kind of a line where that thing, that little problem they had in the beginning, is the huge problem that keeps them from fulfilling their goals at the end, and they recognize that and they give up something and move on. It's nice if you can tie it all together. It just gives your novel, your story, more depth and more meaning. And I'm not going to talk too much about the antagonist here, but since I'm on it already, there's a little note down here: your story may need an antagonist who's trying to get, achieve, or do something that puts him in odds with your hero. If possible, that huge obstacle, it could just be faceless forces, maybe it's earthquakes. You're going to have lots of challenges and obstacles, which we'll go through later, but you want one main thing that probably is deliberate and conscious, which is an antagonist. An antagonist is a properly motivated character whose will is at odds with your protagonist, with your hero. And it's nice if you can not necessarily make them sympathetic. Not every antagonist needs to be redeemed, but you want to at least give them rational motivation, so they're not just pure evil. Even though, for example, Voldemort is basically pure evil. Voldemort's not acting without reason. He believes strongly that the magical community should rule over the non-magicals because they are more powerful. So he's basically a racial supremacist. But he believes in his vision, and he believes it's his obligation and duty to change the world. So he's properly motivated. He has hopefully immoral motivations, but you want to try to give him a little more depth than just, the evil monster who's just attacking all the time just because he wants to destroy things or sow chaos. And also hopefully that evil character or antagonist or villain, whatever the thing that he wants is tied to whatever gift or role the protagonist is going to play. So it's inevitable that they will be at odds, and they will have to defeat each other for either one of them to complete their goal. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that they both have a goal that's at odds. It could just be because the hero, the protagonist, is so good, they feel obligated to stop the villain from whatever dastardly plan he's brewing up. Another thing that your story is going to need is unique settings or description. Later, when we talk about editing, personally, I've found that most of the deep description building stuff happens later. First, in the first draft, when we do our drafting, you want to focus on the story. You want to focus on what actually happens and why it has to happen, and why it matters, so that you're always, something happens, the characters have to react, then something else happens. Actually, I kind of screwed that up. Something happens, the characters stop to think and reflect about the thing that happened, and they make a new plan or agenda, a new plan of action. Then they take action, and they are usually thwarted, and something else happens. Those things. It's basically three things. It's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So those three things keep happening over and over and over again throughout the course of the story. Something happens, they react or respond, they take action, something else happens. It's a way to keep your story moving forward. So we definitely want to focus more on the plot events first. But your plot will also be more memorable if it takes place in a unique, engaging world. And a lot of the obstacles or characters or challenges will come from your unique settings or your scene description. So you do want to think about where the story takes place and try to build up those scenes as much as possible. So you don't want the entire thing to take place in one room. You don't want them to be sitting around in their house talking about things. There should always be a little bit of risk or danger in the environment, especially when they're going to try to accomplish a new goal. There should be things that are stopping them in the environment that make the challenge more risky or more dangerous. But also it should just be kind of visually stunning. You can play with colors. You want to make everything kind of bigger and more visual. You want to think in terms of a scene. So in every scene, in every chapter or setting or major plot event, you want to look at it as if you could paint one perfect picture that encompasses all of the major conflict in that scene, and kind of figure out, like, how is this going to look? What picture do I want to leave readers with? And the bigger and more colorful you make that, thinking about like what they're wearing, what weapons they're carrying, where they are, what they're looking at. This is, again, stuff that will make a lot more sense later in the editing. It's something I usually do in the third or fourth paths of my novel, where I already have figured out everything that happens, and now I'm just going back and fixing the details. And I'm like, okay, but what does this scene look like? What are they wearing? If I'm looking at the characters, you know, I have to keep track of when did they last change clothes, what did they put on, what did they take off, but don't focus on it yet. I'm mentioning it because you do want to have a basic idea of the setting, and actually just when you're figuring out the plotting, and right now we're just in the very early rough draft stages thinking about ideas, it's a good idea to think about the biggest scenes that you can. What would be an amazing scene? For example, in the end of the book I'm writing next, my protagonist basically gets mechanical wings and has a sword and has to defeat this giant dragon. So the scene in my mind, actually no, I screwed that up. So she has a friend, her angel romance has mechanical wings, and he flies her up and throws her down, and then she kind of tears the dragon in half with this magical weapon that she's had to forge from 7 ancient scales, which is like the whole plot of my 4th book, is that she has to go around collecting these artifacts to create the weapon so that she can defeat the antagonist at the end of the book. So I have a very clear, I haven't written that book, I haven't plotted it yet, I don't really know all of the details, but I have a clear scene already. So if you can think of 3 or 4 huge epic scenes that are going to take place, and even if you want to draw a quick picture or illustration, or what's great is to search for concept art. If you look on Pinterest, or if you look for just really cool illustration, you can't copy other people's illustrations or artwork, but you can get inspiration for your characters and for your scenes. And that's a good idea, just to kind of create a swipe file of really cool, epic looking visual inspiration that you can use to develop the scenes that you might want to put in your story or your book. Later, you're going to have to figure out what's actually happening in the scene. How do they get to that scene? What do they have to do in that scene? But you can start by just thinking of, how do I make this look amazing? And that's something that we can do even at this point when we're pretty early on. So finally, the last really important piece of your story is going to be the ensemble or the cast or the crew. So I have this down as interesting characters. The background art that I chose isn't quite right, but the idea of your ensemble cast is that your character needs more than just a main antagonist. They need a crew of supporting characters, because to have a really satisfying story or plot, it's going to have to matter emotionally. And emotions almost always come from relationships. So how people are feeling about each other, the relationships between their romantic interest, if there is one, their friends, their family, their peers, their mentors, those feelings are going to be the deep-seated, like, heart, emotional heart and core of your book. All of the other action, all of the other cool events and fight scenes and whatnot, they're going to be deepened by the feelings that are generated between your characters. And so it's important to create an interesting cast of characters, not only just to have more than, one protagonist, but also to create conflict and suspense. And I have a list that I'm going to go into next about potential characters that you can add, and then we're going to go through a list of attributes to make their personalities a little bit more interesting. But I'm going to read this part here. Relationships, betrayal, lies, promises, romance, friendships, enemies. Your protagonist should be torn between loyalties and need to make difficult moral decisions. So that's one of the main things of a challenging, interesting story, is not only are there physical challenges that are difficult and potentially dangerous or risky, but there have to be morally compromising choices that are difficult to make. They have to be forced to choose between impossible things where either way it's going to be a bad decision. Either way they're going to have to betray someone or let someone down. You're going to have, friendships or love interests fall apart because they, even if they care about each other, they are devoted to divergent paths or different goals. And they may have to, face off or fight each other to get what they want. So to really have structural differences in your story where it's not purely linear, and to have just more depth and conflict, you're going to need a lot of different characters with their own backstories and their own motivations and their own goals and dreams. So I mentioned earlier that one of the oldest stories is just the knight saving the princess from the dragon, which is basically Mario. Mario's goal is to rescue the princess, but every time he completes a quest and defeats the dragon, he's told the princess has been moved to another castle and he has to do it all over again. That's kind of what you want to have happen for your book. He has one main goal. He's always fighting new challenges to get closer to the goal, but the goalpost is always moved. It's not like if it was just defeat the dragon, save the princess, it'd be a short story. And there wouldn't be enough conflict and depth to have a really satisfying novel. What you need to have is many, many challenges that get harder and harder, but by persevering and growing and being challenged through these obstacles, the main character is forced to address some personal limitations and hopefully become the hero that is worthy of saving the princess. Anyway, that's why I included this picture. I was looking for some kind of a picture that represented a cast or an ensemble. And so you'll notice, it's not just about Mario and the princess and the dragon. There's also all of the little guys that that are little slight dangers in the landscape that Mario has to overcome or use to get closer to the goal. And also there's a little bit of relationships. He has a brother. There are things that help him and things that hurt him. There's a lot of supporting characters. Anyway, that's why the image is there. I'm going to quickly go through this roll call. You might want to think about having your main character or your protagonist, a best friend who is a supporter, another best friend who is a skeptic, potentially something that's done really often in young adult. For example, Harry Potter has Hermione and Ron, which the three of them have very different personality styles. And there's also some weirdness between, you know, those three friends figuring out, are their relationships platonic or romantic? They start dating other people and it gets weird. So having those three best friends who have different personality styles but form a really tight group together and support each other, that can be a really powerful motive. It doesn't have to be three, but three just works like a good number. Another thing you see really commonly in like detective TV shows is you have the really handsome guy and the really pretty girl, often a girl detective and like a eccentric outsider, but sometimes those roles are switched and they are platonic friends who solve crimes together. So having just like a core friendship, and usually those friendships are, they already have conflict because their personalities are so different. You might have a comedian or a jokester, someone who's witty and clever and says funny things. You might have a teacher or a mentor. Generally, the teacher is someone from like the ordinary world or their past. The mentor is usually the wise old person once they begin their new quest into the magical world that explains things to them. This doesn't have to be, I mentioned things like magic, but I'm not necessarily talking about fantasy. This could just be, the ordinary world is what they were doing before, the status quo. The extraordinary world is just the adventure that they're called on, where there's probably going to be some new things they don't know about yet, and someone's going to have to explain those new things. They might have a boss or parents or siblings. I've seen some things done really well, even with short story flash fiction, with siblings, because we tend to have very deep feelings about our siblings in a different way than we feel about our parents. So that can be a really powerful character to add into your story, is to think about how many siblings they have, what kind of siblings they have, and to try to make their siblings part of their story. There could be a nosy neighbor or just somebody who's always, you know, butting in, spying on them, trying to figure out what they're doing, watching them a little bit. There could be a nemesis. And here I've separated the nemesis from the main antagonist. A nemesis is kind of like Draco Malfoy, where there's a bully at school. It's a very core character, but it's more like your peer who is on your level, who's a challenger. So maybe like they're on your side. They're also part of your school or your team. They're not the bad guy or part of the antagonist forces, but they're still really against you. This could be just someone you're competing with, or someone, you know, who's just a bully because they don't like you for whatever reason. That's kind of what a nemesis is. There could be a cute sidekick, which could be something like a pet, or it could be someone who just kind of follows them around. Then you're going to have the main antagonist, the antagonist's henchman. For all those challenges, and we'll get into later about all of the different challenges you can include in the novel, the big ones are going to be part of the main antagonist's agenda or directly related to the antagonist. There's also going to be a lot of situational obstacles where, you know, they need to get into a room, but first they have to find the key. So first they have to find a puzzle. It's not directly related to the antagonist. It's just kind of something that's a challenge that's in the way. And then finally, you can have something like a traitor. And this is someone who is on their team, who they consider an ally, who ultimately betrays them for whatever reasons. Maybe not necessarily because they were evil. Maybe they were pressured or forced into it, or because, you know, someone kidnapped their parents or whatever. Or it could just be someone who is not a good guy and is always looking out for themselves, who maybe they even suspect a little bit. Although if they suspect it, you always want your surprises to hit hard emotionally, which means you don't want to set up a traitor with a personality of betrayal, because if the readers expect to be betrayed by someone and then they are, it's not going to be a surprise, and then they'll think, why didn't the protagonist, you know, expect that? I saw it coming as a reader. How come the protagonist isn't smart enough to not trust this guy who's obviously a bad guy? You want to try to keep your surprises surprising by, for example, if there's going to be an actual traitor, you make them really nice and supportive so that it's not quite as obvious that, you know, what's coming next. But we'll talk all about that stuff later. And then we have some personality attributes. This is just a quick list. If you look online, you can find tons and tons of things. However, I don't necessarily recommend building a huge backstory or a list for all of your characters. It can be really useful when you're writing to figure out who your characters are first. But I don't think good fiction is driven by characters. Characters are really important. I'm a big fan of plot-based fiction because it has more momentum. So you do want really deep developed characters, and you want their personalities to influence the plot. But I don't think it's worth, you know, writing 20 or 30 pages for every supporting character. I'm going to go through this list pretty quickly. Where they live, what they wear. They might have a personal basic style that matches their personality a little bit. Their hair and eye color is a little bit important, because you'll find once you're writing, it's really easy to lose track, you know, even of what their name is. We published a book a few days ago and I screwed up, you know, one of the main characters' names in the last chapter or something. I spelled it wrong. And even this book I'm writing now, which is a sequel, I've already written the first book and I still can't remember the name of the king. So I have King Richard or King Philip, and I flip back and forth all the time. So having like they call it a character library, I think, but just like at the beginning of your document, if you have a short list of your characters with a short list of, you know, their names, hair and eye color, what they wear, it can be really useful just to have that information written down somewhere you can quickly go back and check. An object they treasure is kind of like the totem that I mentioned earlier, where it could be, and the way I like to describe it in the plot dot, which is a short book I think I'll talk about later and give you access to, the idea behind it was, like I said, if you can have a scene where you picture what everything looks like and add a little flash of color for that scene, which is the unique object or totem that they carry. One of my characters is all goth. She wears all black, but she has a little colorful chunk of Lego that she wears because it reminds her of her brother, which is her major motivating factor, and also the fatal flaw that she needs to overcome in the story. So to have like a visual representation of the story conflict and an actual physical object that she will have to give up and sacrifice through the events of the novel can be really powerful, and also just makes a really nice looking visual scene. But this could also just be something like a hobby. So maybe they're a photographer and they always carry around a camera. Or maybe they're insecure about their wild hair, so they always wear a long hat to cover their ears. Something like that can be really meaningful. Another easy way to get to kind of the heart of the character is something they love, something they hate, and something they would never do. And this one, I wish I knew exactly where I found it, because I think it's somebody else's piece of writing advice, or I saw it online or something. But the idea is, if you can think of something that that character would never do because it goes against their beliefs or ideology or everything that they care about, and then orchestrate the events of your novel to force them to do the thing that they would never do, that can be really powerful And it also means that your challenges and obstacles and stakes are in the right direction. If you have challenges that force the characters to do the thing that they never thought they would do, it's a real moral struggle for them, especially for your protagonist, but also for some of your main supporting characters. You don't have to do this for all of the characters. If they only show up, on stage once or twice, you don't have to build all this stuff out, but it can be really helpful, even if it's not used in the book itself, just to make a quick list and know this stuff, because it might solve a problem. You may later come to a point where you're stuck in the story and you're not sure how to move forward, and then you can quickly check back your attributes for your characters list and think, what if this character had to do this thing and it was a moral struggle for them? That could be a really unique and powerful plot device. They could also have a weird habit, which kind of just makes them more quirky and lovable. And then you can think about what they want immediately and permanently. So what they want right now, maybe like their favorite foods, what they're always drinking or eating, so that even in the slower scenes, they are doing something. They always are a little bit motivated. At the beginning of every scene, you could think, what do my main... Well, you can think, who is in this scene? Which of my characters are in this chapter right now, and which ones aren't in this chapter, and where are they? And then you can think, what do these three characters want right now, and how can I make what they want at odds with each other to create conflict? So that can be a really useful device. But then also, what do they want permanently out of life? What are their deep passions or desires? What are they, in the perfect world, why are they on this adventure? Why are they part of this mission? Why are they risking their lives, hopefully, or at least their identities? Or they have to be, your characters have to be put at some risk so that they are properly motivated by desire, so that it matters. If there's no risk, then there's no stakes, and they don't have to desire anything. They're just coming along because they're bored and they don't know what to do with themselves. That's not going to be a strong enough story. That's fine for the first couple chapters maybe, but you're going to have to give your characters proper motivation to come along on this adventure and be involved in the quest. So here's another slide basically about the same thing, and I'm talking about this a lot because it's really the crucial ingredient to captivating story, and something that I see a lot of authors or writers do wrong with their first story is that there's just not enough happening, or the things that are happening don't have any emotional stakes, so there's no conflict or suspense or intrigue because there's no real risk. So the obstacles and challenges and difficult decisions, the rewards must outweigh the risks. They have to want the goal enough to overcome the dangers, and they must be completely committed to action. So they have to want something badly enough to persevere even when things get really hard. They have to be motivated so that they won't just quit and go home and give up. So you have to think about, what do your characters want enough to continue with the action? You can also burn bridges behind them. So it could be not just that there's something they desire, but they are forced onto this path. And we're going to talk about that later. That's basically what the inciting incident or the point of no return is. It's just sometimes in the beginning, the main character, they don't want anything. It's just something happens that destroys their life, and they don't have a choice because what they wanted before is gone, and now they have to move forward. They may not make a decision about what to do or what they actually want until the midpoint, where they're actively choosing to participate and to have a deliberate role in the plot events. Usually the first half of the book, they're still just recovering or responding to events. They're a passive character. So it's okay if you don't know, or they don't know what they want in the beginning. It's okay to just throw a bunch of action at them and see how they respond. But it's a good idea to think about this stuff because you always want to be inventing new obstacles and challenges. You never want to make anything easy, and you never want them to achieve any goal. Whatever they set out to do should be thwarted or failed. Almost every quest, every goal, or mini action, micro action, they continually fail basically until the end of the book with increasingly difficult challenges and obstacles. You can have scenes that start off relatively easy where they're just going, to kind of check something out, and they're not prepared for the risks that they're going into, so they don't think this is a risky situation, so maybe they don't need proper motivation. But any scene that begins like that should end with a big event or twist or something changing or happening that forces them to respond or react. And so finally, this is just a little recap. And I really wanted to I had this picture in my mind that I didn't produce for you, but I'll describe it really quickly. Basically, it'd be a little tiny hero trying to get to the end goal over here, and a huge line cutting through the middle that's too big for the character to get over. So at the beginning of the story, the character cannot get past the obstacle to get to the end goal. If you don't remember anything else, that's basically what a story or a novel is. It's a goal that's too big for the current character to properly achieve because of unforeseen obstacles that they aren't strong enough to face. Once you have that in mind, you can try to figure out where the beginning and the end is. So it's one character, one goal achieved, and one big challenge or problem in the middle, and that's going to be your story. So you want to start your story at the beginning, very close to the action. You're going to very quickly introduce the ordinary world, the characters, the protagonists, the normal setup of this world. But then in the first chapter, or at least in the first 2 or 3 chapters, something huge is going to happen that will change everything and force the character onto this adventure. And you want to get there pretty quickly. So we're going to talk later in great depth about how to write the beginning of your book and how to write the first few chapters, because it is really important where you place this beginning, where you actually choose to start the story. In the middle of the book, they are going to be forced to fight, which means, like I said earlier, a lot of the book, most like the first half of the book, they are reacting or avoiding the conflict, because smart characters will avoid unnecessary conflict or risk, but they will, in the course of the events, become committed to the outcome enough that they will realize they can't be a passive bystander anymore because they care too much about the results or the other characters or the whatever is taking place, the central conflict, and they shift from victim to warrior. That's basically the midpoint of the novel. There's a great book called Right from the Middle, and we'll talk a lot about this later when we go through the actual plot events. But if you are just making a really simple outline, this week of where my story might start, what's the big thing they're going to have to face, and then the end. This big thing, the middle thing, at the midpoint, they're still just figuring out. I like in my books, by the midpoint, they basically figured out what's going on. So the first half of the book, they don't even know maybe who the antagonist is or what they want or what's going on. But by the middle, they pretty much know what's going on. And only closer to the end of the book do they actually defeat the antagonist for real. So this middle is a little bit sloppy because they're not actually fighting the antagonist right in the middle of the book, but the whole middle of your book is them figuring out who the antagonist is and why they need to be defeated and what they have to lose and why it matters. And then from that point in the middle where they figured stuff out, they still are probably not strong enough to actually defeat the antagonist. So the second half of the book is just, getting the magical weapons or whatever they need to fight the antagonist and win. They usually actually will face the antagonist and lose because they had insufficient strength or weaponry, or they're missing some crucial ingredient, or they hadn't figured out their fatal flaw yet, which may be overwhelming. We're going to talk way more about that stuff later. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. The whole middle of your book is basically the one big challenge, but that challenge will be broken up into many different stages. And then finally, at the end, which is going to be the final battle scene and also the conclusion and the resolution, and I have noted here sacrifice to win, because the quest or the final victory is probably going to force them to give up something they've been holding on to. So the whole book, they probably had their own personal goal. And what usually happens for most protagonists or most heroes is that they give up what they wanted for what other people want. It's a self-sacrifice. They're giving up their hope of achieving the thing that they've held on to. And often this is just they want to go back to their normal, ordinary world. They want, this thing at the beginning of the book, and by the end of the book they realize they can't have it, or it's not actually what they want because they're a new character, or they care too much about other people, and getting what they want will take away things from somebody else. Even like in a romance plot, this is really common, where they finally see that they love the other person enough to give up control. Even if they can't have that other person, they want that other person to be happy. They stop acting out of self-interest and they start acting for the interests of others. That's why I have sacrifice to win. It's not necessary in every case, but often there's some sense of, it doesn't have to be a literal sacrifice, although often it is. If you watch Netflix or movies or anything, there's almost always a point at the end of a movie where the hero appears to go over the cliff, and there's a long, heavy pause where all of the supporting cast begins to cry because they think the hero is doomed or defeated, or they sacrifice themselves, and then you see the hand come back over the cliff and everybody is, relieved. This is Harry Potter also, of course, where Harry Potter seems to have died and is carried in this kind of funeral procession, and Voldemort is, showing off the defeated Harry Potter and showing that he's won, and then Harry Potter comes back to life, actually. So it's a really common literary trope. It doesn't have to be literal like that, but it should cost them something. In defeating the antagonist and completing the quest, it should come at a great cost, a great personal cost to your main antagonist. No, to your main protagonist. Sorry, I said that wrong. And then finally, there's usually a scene or like an epilogue. It doesn't have to be the case. Most readers like in like a real finished, polished novel, most readers like some resolution, even if it's a book one of a series. I personally love ending my books on hard cliffhangers. Readers kind of hate them, but they also go buy the next book because they want to find out what happens. But if you can, there's usually some kind of bittersweet ending where there's a bit of a return to the beginning, where the character has time to reflect over where they started and how far they've come, and possibly return back home from a different perspective and find that the world is the same, but they are new, so everything looks different. We are actually going to be focusing on writing shorter books. Someone asked if it's okay that they want their book to be 90,000 words. That's totally fine. I'm aiming for 50,000 words because that's long enough to be a satisfying rough draft. There's a danger actually in overwriting and including too many scenes because you may not keep the momentum. So I'd rather have you write a short, strong, powerful novel where things keep happening than like a long novel with a bunch of, bloated backstory. And also the first rough draft is usually not all the words anyway. You'll find in the revision and the editing, you'll be adding more words and description. So if we start with a 50,000 word novel, by the time we get through editing, it'll be closer to 65,000 or even 75,000 words, which is a good length. The majority of popular published fiction is around 60,000, 65,000 words. That's normal. An epic fantasy is closer to 80 or 90,000 words, but if you were going to get a traditional publishing deal, they would generally not be looking for a book that's longer than 100,000 words because that's more than readers actually want. They want a strong, well-plotted, well-paced story where things keep happening rather than, just something really, really long. And finally, I'm going to sneak one more thing in here. This one's a little bit more advanced, and we're not actually doing the plotting yet, but I want to plant the seed in your mind because this is where a lot of writers screw up, is that they don't know where to start their story and they try to throw in too much information or they're jumping around too much. So you want to have a linear timeline, or at least it's going to be a lot easier if you have a linear timeline, which means, one plot event impacts the next plot event like a series of dominoes. Something happens, it hits the next link in the chain, and there's a continuation where the links just keep falling until you get to the end. One of my first novels was a time travel book, which I really enjoyed writing, but was really difficult. And I think you should really try to focus on telling a clean, engaging, linear story before you try to do something a lot more difficult, like jumping around. And the danger here usually is in the backstory and the info dumps. What I see a lot of writers doing, even in like a first chapter, is they feel like they need to introduce all of the stuff to their readers. So they may start with the action, but then there's all this info dump where you don't want to share information unless it's coming from the characters, unless it's crucial and relevant to the characters in the present situation and they're noticing it or commenting on it. There's something called show don't tell, which we'll talk about later, but basically you don't want to come in as the author and tell readers a bunch of stuff directly, because it's kind of like a timeout. Like you start with your characters doing something and then you say, okay, wait, I've got to tell you about, this one time 10 years ago where the character did this other thing, or about this other thing that's going on with, here's the scene, and one time my protagonist did this thing in this scene. It's kind of like a flashback or a cutscene, but you don't want to have more flashbacks and cutscenes than you have actual story. You want to try to stay in the present, and I'll talk later about present tense or past tense and choosing a point of view and stuff, but you want to always try to stay in one action, as if you were filming the camera on a scene and things are taking place right now. You want to stay in that moment. The character can sometimes remember things or flashback or have dreams, although I'd be really careful about sneaking in dream scenes or too many dream scenes. A lot of amateur writers will also do a lot of stuff like, then they went to sleep and then they had a dream and then they woke up. You don't want every chapter starting with and then they woke up. You want every chapter starting with right before the beginning of the next crucial piece of action that's going to happen to further the plot. Your readers aren't going to care about the backstory or the things that happened in the past unless the drama of the present is already engaging. So unless they care about your main characters, unless there are something that they want, an obstacle, so that there's some risk and intrigue. What's going to happen next? Can they get the thing that they want to get? You have to start with the actual story first. The backstory, the info dumps can be really useful later once you already have their attention, because there's already conflict and stakes in the present moment, in the scene, that's already engaging enough to keep readers' attention and make them care about what happens next. They have to care about the character and care about what happens next before they care about what happened to the character 5 or 10 years ago. You may also feel like it's crucially relevant to start with something like a prologue, or in chapter 1, you start with, when they were 7 years old and they met each other, and then fast forward to 10 years later. That's really risky and a little bit dangerous. So we'll get into that later, but I wanted to point it out here that ideally you will start close to the present action, and your entire story will take place in a few weeks, in a few months, within a year at least, possibly a couple years, but it's really hard to pull off a story where you're skipping years and years at a time, or even decades and decades, or centuries if you're trying to plan like an epic sweeping something, because the stakes won't matter anymore. If your characters, like if it's a year or two later, the character's not going to have the same conflict or stakes. You need to hold readers' attention by having one main story that lasts the length of your book, where there's one main thing that they're trying to achieve, one main antagonist or obstacle, and then an outcome. Do they succeed or fail at their quest? And the whole story is going to be them going through the motions of achieving that one agenda. If you're jumping years, you're probably going to have different agendas, different characters, different goals, and readers aren't going to be engaged because you're switching things up too much. So that's all I'm actually going to say in this video. I wanted to keep these videos shorter, and this one is already an hour. You can hopefully break up this video by watching it into, you can watch 10 or 15 minutes a day and break it up into chunks over the week. Here is the exercise for the week. See if you can write your story in a few sentences using this formula. You don't have to do it right now. I would think about all of this stuff, start mapping out some of your characters, start thinking of some epic scenes that you might want to include and where the story takes place. There was actually one other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't, and I don't have a slide for it, but that's genre. So you really have to decide what kind of genre the story that you're writing is going to be, because if it's all the genres, readers have certain expectations for every genre. If you are writing something with science fiction and thriller and romance and historical, time travel, it's going to be everything, and readers aren't going to know what to do with it. It's not going to really satisfy readers because you're trying to do too much in one story. Even if you do all of those things, you still have to figure out what your main genre and who your audience is and what do they expect from that genre. Because there are rules to every genre. If you're writing an action adventure or a thriller or a mystery, it's going to have different pacing. It's going to have different rules and structure. The plots that I'm going to share with you and the basic hero's journey is going to work for all different kinds of genres, but there's still going to be some rules that apply to different specific genres. If you're writing science fiction, you're going to have rules and science. If you're writing fantasy, there's going to be more magic. So it matters in terms of your setting, because your fantasy might take place in a typical epic fantasy setting with dragons and castles, and your science fiction might take place in a dystopian future world with zombies or aliens or something. So depending on what genre you choose, that's really going to define how your story takes place and the obstacles that are happening. So anyway, that's something else to think about. See if you can fill in the blanks. My character is a blank who wants blank. But when they blank, they're forced to blank, and they have to choose between blank and blank. So this just sets up the basics. What does my character want? Who is he? What's his and he or she or they, what are they right now? What do they want right now? What's going to happen that forces them to do something different that they don't necessarily want to do? And how is that going to put them in a really difficult moral choice that forces them to decide between two things that they want? They're basically going to have to decide to give something up. So they have to care about things enough that it's really going to hurt when they're forced to choose. And that's going to be the main conflict of your book. So even though there's an antagonist or external villain or forces that are instrumental in keeping things interesting, the core heart of your story is going to be that emotional choice where they're forced to give something up. In the end, they learn, and I have an asterisk here because this is probably the theme of the book, and you don't necessarily have to have a theme, but it's something that is nice to think about, and you might want to. It's kind of like the morale of the story. I don't believe that stories have to have a morale or have to have like a lesson. As long as your story is engaging and fun to read, that's fine. But it's something that you might want to think about. Generally, they have a lack of knowledge and they had to make difficult decisions. And so at the end, even if they don't think about it consciously, they probably have learned some lesson, which if you're ever wondering, or if you're looking up, writing fiction and you hear people talk about the theme, that's basically what they're talking about. It's what did they learn? What was the point of this story? So I hope this video has been useful. If you want to, I'm going to turn the comments on if you're in the course so that you can do the exercise and post your sentence or two down below. If you want to, share it with the other people in the course. 500 people are already signed up in the course and more will be added. That's really exciting. I'm really glad you're here. I hope that you've learned something. In this video, I was a little wary that it's too basic, but this is really crucial story stuff that we have to get into before we get into the plotting, because if your book, if you don't have this stuff right, readers aren't going to feel engaged in your story because the stakes aren't deep enough. There's not a big enough obstacle. Your characters aren't personally motivated. They don't have, enough to lose or enough to gain to keep things interesting. So to have a really strong novel, it's important to do some of this work and really figure out your characters and the central conflict. Next week, we're going to go a little deeper, and I'm going to cover the 8 or 9 crucial turning points that I like to have in every book. So you'll get kind of a step-by-step diagram that will walk you through the major turning points, and figuring those out will give your book a lot of momentum and structure. So that's really exciting. I hope you're looking forward to that. I'll share that next week. Goodbye and good luck with your writing.